Good afternoon. At least it is in Miami, Florida. That's where I'm at. Probably one of the warmest spots in the United States right now. Miserable in the summer, but nice this time of year.
Rather cold, Bill. I enjoy the winter.
Yeah, it's we've got Captain Mike Dugan and two special invited guests. Deputy Chief Retired, Newark, New Jersey, Chief Mike Nasta, and Lieutenant Ladder 26, sir?
42.
42. Lieutenant Joe Berry, a consummate, lifelong, career-long researcher and student of the fire service. I want to give out a shout out to Key. That's keyhose.com. We just operated with Key at the Florida Fire Chiefs Conference in Orlando, and it's very easy to teach with because it's so hard to kink. And I have to qualify when we're working with the Key Combat Ready, the True ID, and the Combat Sniper that you might not be able to do this with the particular grade and brand of hose that you're operating with. And but you can do it with the Key. I say this every session: take the Key challenge, try to kink that hose. You'll be hard pressed to do it. Today we're going to talk about being at risk when we don't really understand or realize the risk. And Joe wrote an excellent examination, and he's going to utilize the word. I think it is so fitting for how we get caught off guard. Joe, you want to go ahead with your definition, Joe, please?
Sure. The title is called Firefighters Ambushed, and I'll read the definition again. It's the act or condition that lies in a wait, to wait in hiding, making a surprise attack. The word ambush is an accurate description of not being aware of a life-threatening problem that is present within the fire building that will impede fire operations and threaten the lives of firefighters. There have been numerous firefighter fatalities and close calls that occurred over many decades of firefighting. Is one common thread here and an unknown factor that contributed to these fatalities, or the fact that this is a dangerous profession? Some root causes that hampered fire operations and claimed the lives of firefighters in every rank of the fire service are illegal renovations or alterations, building modifications, failure of lightweight truss floor platforms, buildings with hidden voids, operating in and not aware of the fire flow path. When a fatal fire claims the life of a firefighter operating at a structural fire, a post-analysis investigation is set forth. The investigation consists of collecting data, determining the root cause, and implementing correction action. This article highlights a few past fire incidents. This statement is worth its weight in gold. Unintended consequences are the outcomes of a purposeful action that are not intended or foreseen to cause harm.
Mark, if you could show the slides. This is an ambush. This was a construction site in Kansas City, Missouri in 1988. Well, why are we going so far back? Because the same thing could happen today. Now, we are safer. This brought about, as most tragedies do, Joe, improvements in regulations and in informing the fire department, right to know laws, and placarding, labeling, pre-fire planning throughout the fire service, not just KCMO. That's the crater. And you had several 100,000 pounds of ammonium nitrate fuel oil mixture at a construction site where they were blasting to make a new highway. And an engine got there with three firefighters, a driver, officer, and a firefighter. And they found two separate fires. So they called for another engine. So now they got 6 firefighters on the scene. They're operating. And at I think it was about 4:30 in the morning, there was a tremendous explosion. And if you go to the next picture, Mark, that's one of the engines. Okay. And if you go to the next picture, that's the same engine. And next picture, This is them. You can see to the upper right corner the other engine, and the brothers taking their fallen brothers out of this site. Just within the last couple of months, there was an incident, and it occurred as a result of electric vehicles that were crammed, for lack of a better term, crammed into a shipping container. And these vehicles had been supposedly, contaminated with floodwater. And there was off-gassing that is associated with the thermal runaways. That white, steamy smoke, misty smoke is not steam, bro. It's not steam. It's a witch's brew of flammable or explosive and toxic gases. And thank God, the shipping container and the cars blew up before the fire companies got on the scene, because there's no supposition, there's no guessing. They would have all been dead. There were chunks of shrapnel that were thrown hundreds of feet as a result of this. Again, an ambush. I want to give a shout out to the IAFC, International Association of Fire Chiefs, Department of Energy, and ULFSRI, a joint project on researching energy storage systems. In the state of Florida, primarily they're in the garage, but they can be mounted on an exterior wall. They can be mounted on a pad. They can be in a basement. They can be in a garage. And they consist of modules of lithium-ion batteries, and generally safe. Problem is, I'm reading through this stuff. You're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't. If you ventilate, you bring the mixture of gases down within their flammable or explosive range. If you do nothing, it's still going to explode. One thing is for sure: don't stand in front of the garage door with a rotary saw and start cutting this thing. And I think most of you guys have seen that video from Colorado, where the garage door blows up and hits the IC in the helmet and knocks the helmet off. Talk about a close call. So, Mike, I know that your department has had some rough times lately, as mine. I don't know to what extent you can talk about it. What we're really looking for, Chief, is lessons learned from somebody that's been there, either physically or at least vicariously, and what we can do to avoid a similar tragedy. So take as much time as you want, Mike.
In our case scenario was July 5th, 2023. We lost 2 firemen aboard a Ro-Ro carrier that was actually loading used cars. When the initial dispatch came in, what type of cars that were on this ship wasn't available, and I believe the IC immediately called dispatch and asked them if there were electric cars involved. So it took a little while for them to find that out, but it wasn't. In this case, it happened to be all used cars being loaded on a ship, and I believe they were being sent to Africa. And it was a Ro-Ro ship, which means the cars were being driven onto the ship, and they are lashed in place, and the decks are lowered almost to the roof line of the cars, so that next deck above it can load more cars. This particular situation, the cars are all supposed to be drained of gas and oil before they're loaded, but they were driving the cars on, and from what I understand, there was a short in this particular vehicle, and once it got going, it was on the 10th deck, which the main fire deck, and it extended to deck 11 and deck 12. As best as I was told, the best I can talk about at this point anyway, is that as the fire spread, we had companies operating on all 3 of the decks. The 12th deck was an exterior deck, which was the top deck of the ship, and that's also where I believe where the command post was located. The ship's crew initially reported to the IC that they had the majority of the fire knocked down prior to the fire department's arrival. That turned out not to be true. Then after that, the IC was getting some conflicting reports that there was little or no smoke on the 11th floor, but they still had plenty of heat, and they didn't realize the fire was still below them at that point. So there was kind of conflicting reports of conditions and locations of the fire, which once that happened, they put companies on all three of the decks. The deputy chief was on the top deck in the incident command. There was a battalion chief on each one of the decks directing the companies. If you've never been on one of these ships, these cars are literally 6 inches apart on the ship, and they're lashed. And when they lower the deck almost to the roof height. So as the companies entered these decks and they started to stretch in to knock some of the fire down, the fire wasn't. They weren't having a good effect on the fire. It continued to increase. From what I understand, a couple of the engine companies started to retreat back to an area of refuge, which is where they entered, and 2 of the firefighters got separated. Maydays were sounded. They located the Newark Fire Department located the first firefighter, brought him out. He was brought to the 12th deck and lowered to the ground via the ship's crane. The second firefighter, they started to look for him. The Newark crew started to go in. At this point, it was taking some time. They couldn't find him. The conditions were getting worse. So they continued to operate on the fire, and then they called. Obviously, mutual aid was called in. USAR teams came in from New Jersey, Task Force 1, and also FDNY Rescue 5 and some of their special ops people. I'm not sure which ones. I know there were a couple of chief officers that came over with them. It took, I believe, around an hour and a half. Don't quote me on the time. I'm not sure how accurate it is. The second firefighter was located by the FDNY and I believe the Hackensack Fire Department. The incident commander, again, was kind of caught blindsided. The ships, because of the conflicting reports he received. Bottom line was, in those conditions, very, very difficult to operate. The guys were caught in between. The jaws of life actually had to be brought in to push the cars apart to get the first firefighter out. I'm not sure if the same thing happened to the second firefighter, where they needed that type of equipment or they were just located. Now, from what I understand, with the second firefighter, Newark search ropes went in as far as they can. Those members had to get out because they were running out of air. FDNY attached to the end of the Newark search rope and continued to search further into the ship. And I believe he was found around 250 feet in from where they had originally entered. Now I've had a couple of ship fires in my career. One was in a container, similar to what you had, but it wasn't an electric car, but it was still on the ship when it was burning. The problem with those things is you have to take all the containers off the top of the ship. In our particular case, the container was a below deck container. So they had to fully unload the entire ship to pull the hatch cover off, to pull the burning container out of the ship. Like I said, that was just it was a regular car. It wasn't electric, so we didn't have the issues that you guys had down in Miami. Long story short, is learn from these, and the Newark Fire Department seems received some training in marine firefighting, but not a lot. FDNY also sent their fireboat over, and they operated there for I think 3 or 4 days until the fire was finally extinguished. It took that long to put all 3 of those decks out. The ship's crew had emptied the CO system into the deck. The problem there is for that to be successful, the decks have to be sealed. When they emptied the CO system into the deck was not sealed, so the CO just escaped, had zero effect on the fire. Obviously, by the time you get all the logistics up, 12 decks above, you're literally 120 feet off the pier. It's about 10 feet per deck. So these guys are operating literally kind of in a high rise, utilizing, their standpipes. The connections are different than we had, but fortunately, we have adapters for that. So that wasn't a huge issue. These things can spiral out of control and quickly outpace the resources that you have available. In Newark, we generally have 18 engines and 9 trucks that run under 6 battalions and 1 deputy every day. I believe that went to a 3rd alarm, plus all the mutual aid between the USAR, the FDNY, I believe it was Rescue 5, a couple of SOC chiefs, their fireboat, and it, like I said, we recovered the guys in a few hours. Unfortunately, the outcome wasn't what we would have liked, but it still took almost 4 days to completely extinguish the fire.
Is there any, I had read an article from a chief in Jacksonville, Mike, about how certain vessels, and I don't remember exactly what the criteria is, the amount of fuel or the size, the tonnage, I'm not exactly sure on the criteria, where you have to have some type of, almost like a performance bond or a agreements that are in place. They're not going to happen right away, but as far as salvage operations, pollution control, dewatering, these types of things where will relieve the fire department, at least partially, some of these responsibilities. Have you ever heard anything like that?
Yeah, to be honest with you, the final extinguishment on that ship was done by the salvage company. Once the salvage company come in, I believe it was the next day, the New York boat stayed on the scene, I believe, for 2 days. I'm not sure. It was somewhere in that area. But once they were gone, the final extinguishment was done by the salvage company. The Coast Guard, in a couple of the 3 ship incidents, 2 were fires, 1 was a hazmat that I had. The Coast Guard has complete control over any kind of vessel in any waterway in the United States. Technically, how the law is written is any waterway that empties out to the ocean falls under the jurisdiction of the Coast Guard. So basically everything. The nice thing about it, the Coast Guard has a tremendous amount of resources. In the particular one where I had the hazmat, they turned around and they came in, and the shipping company said, well, our cleanup company will be here in 3 weeks. The Coast Guard told the captain, ours will be here in an hour. The captain balked because he said, and the Coast Guard basically told him, we're bringing ours in, you're paying for them, that's your choice. So the captain kind of balked at it, and the Coast Guard, well, here's your other option. Take your ship, sail it out to international waters, and then we don't care what you do with it. So basically the ship wasn't moving. So yes, those things are in place, and the Coast Guard is an invaluable resource I've found in the 3 incidents that I've had, on ships, because the ships are so wide and varied. The container ships, we're I think the second busiest port in the country, only behind Long Beach, and the ships that we get in there, compressed gas ships, orange juice tankers, fuel tankers. Ro-ro ships, which was the type of ship these are on, where they ride the cars on and off, and they can ride. And it's not just vehicles; they can ride passenger vehicles, tractor trailers. I've seen them push rail cars into these ro-ro ships. So anything and everything can be on these ships. And our training to try to get on those ships, in the course of my career, I wound up with 2 walkthroughs. The problem was when I was running the training division for the couple of years that I ran it for the Newark Fire Department, with the coordination to get a walkthrough on this ship, you had to coordinate with the ship. You had to coordinate with the Longshoremen's Association. You had the port captain. It was at least 4 or 5 agencies that you had to coordinate just to get a walkthrough. And I was actually fortunate to be able to walk through one ship and actually have a live drill on another. Most people don't get that opportunity, and most field firefighters are not receiving that training, and that was one of the things that we found, and they are working on to correct. At this point in time, I don't know how much progress they had. I couldn't say. I was given one class by the Coast Guard, which was a week-long classroom only. So I never had any hands-on training outside the one drill that we're able to do. So these are very high-risk incidents and things that you normally would need a lot of training, but to get that training is very difficult.
You know, I just wrote a safety bulletin, very similar to well, what we're talking about, being ambushed,
Right.
and how to identify hazardous materials. And I think the guide in the ERG is 111 for unknown, undetermined, and it's very general in a sense. It's like 300 feet at least. It has to be general, for God's sake. It's what else are we going to do? But it's the unknowns, and Joe, as you mentioned, a lot of times, and you did too, Chief Mike, is that you're operating with fire underneath you, and you either know it or you don't know it. It's worse when you don't know it. And I saw that was kind of a thread with a lot of your scenarios, Joe Barry, in your article submission, and all really good, valuable stuff. You know, I got you're gonna like this, Mike Dugan. I get an evaluation from a class at FDIC, and they write, why don't you write about or teach us about fires that occurred in this century? Because the damn buildings are still there, you knucklehead, you meathead. You better be a student of the fire service.
Yeah.
If you don't, and Mike, we've had this discussion, Dugan.
Bill, if you do not know history, you are doomed to repeat it.
Yes.
I look at some of these things. I look at outside of Houston at the church fire with the pastor standing outside, where the pastor said there's nobody in the building, and they went up on the roof, and the guys fell through the roof. And it was a 3-line of duties at a vacant church. I got pictures probably 3 or 4 years ago of guys on the roof of a vacant church, and there was fire. They were working on the roof, and it was a torch job, so it's truss because it's a wide open space like a church.
Yes.
And they're up on there, and they've got this beautiful tower ladder sitting on the ground. It's bedded. I'm like, what haven't we learned? And we have to go back to these things and look at them, Bill. And the other thing I just want to, because you talked about it a little earlier with the ESS, the energy storage systems in a building. In New York City, Con Ed is pushing buildings to give them a room in the building for an ESS system to store the batteries. So at peak demand time, the building can go off the grid and onto the batteries. Well, these are going into buildings in New York City, and our friend Jack Murphy knows about these extensively. But you've got battery storage in this building. And if you are a local department, a small career, a volunteer fire department, if you're not getting out on these things that are being built in your district and finding out about these things, you are doomed to be ambushed when it occurs, because they are coming to every district near you.
We found, Mike, a great benefit of collaborating with our electrical inspectors. And if they're doing things right, they're pulling a permit. If they're doing things right, and you know, when you don't pull a permit and you do things wrong, that's a firefighter killer. Whether it's illegal renovations, taking a bearing wall out and replacing it with a non-bearing wall, whatever it is, if you're not doing it properly, and in this case, it's the permitting process, it puts us and the public, but primarily us, at great risk.
These electric storage buildings, we have several of them. And believe it or not, we have one, and I won't mention the department store that it went into, that their former department store now is loaded with these electric batteries. Another similar situation, another vacant department store, same thing. They took over, they filled, and we actually had a fire in it. And all the floor space was rows and rows of these batteries. And nobody tells us about it. We found it, the first one that we had the fire, and we found by that day it was on fire. We never knew the batteries were even in there. Then when we started looking at, after the fire, we found a second location, and then 2 or 3 afterwards. You know, these surprises, if you're not driving around your neighborhood, and this is where those first 2 companies, just going out and driving it around and see what's going on. These are pretty big buildings that these batteries were installed on, and nobody noticed the first one going in. And if you know that first 2 companies should have at least been able to look at the construction of when they were installing these batteries, but somehow they didn't. As a company officer, that is the most. I always say the company officer is such a strong link between what's going on in the neighborhood and the information that goes out to the rest of the department. Most company officers don't realize how critical their role is in finding these things. So we're not blindsided by them. As far as renovations go, I mean, to me, the worst thing that happened to the fire service was home improvement stores. If people go in and take a class on Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon, they're putting addition on the house because they're experts now. And in the meantime, now we find these things by happenstance because these type of people are not going for permits, and they're not professional contractors or engineers, and we're stuck to deal with the fallout when these illegal or haphazard renovations are built.
I want to. We have a special guest with us. I think are you with the World Headquarters of Engine Company 43, Captain Davis of the Chicago Fire Department?
Yeah, hi guys. Yeah, I'm going to include the World Headquarters and Arctic Headquarters too. It's a nice balmy 9 degrees.
I see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, weather like this, busy. Get busy. Mm-hmm. Summer's hot, busy. Cold weather, busy. That's the way I like it, though.
You guys in Chicago, you take a beating in the heat of the summer as bad or worse than Miami, Florida. And in the winter, you got the exact opposite.
I'd rather do the summer firefighting instead of the cold. You turn the ice really quick. It's been busy. There were all kinds of fires popping up, throughout the city last night, this morning. But they haven't gotten us yet. But the shit's still young.
The topic is ambushed, and we're paraphrasing something that Joe Barry was alluding to, and wrote an excellent examination of it in an article submission. Can you think of either personally or vicariously that you where your guys were just caught off guard by an unknown hazard?
Yeah, Cap, the one thing that comes to mind is the Scotty Leeds, who sustained some pretty significant injuries, walking into an ambush. Your typical routine calls like a gas leak. Now, what happened in his story was he was on Tower 54. They pulled up. They were walking up to the house, and the whole house blew up. There was a gas explosion, and I think a lot of the guys we target walking into ambushes, I think these are more commonplace than routine calls that you go to. Maybe routine calls, you build up maybe a degree of complacency that it's going to be that, and then all of a sudden, I tell you what, it ambushes you. And I can think of that occurs quite a bit. And we hear these stories in the fire service. And they seem to be drawing back from the typical calls we go to. And a lot of that is gas leaks. You do so many of them, he says, what can happen? But there's a lot that can happen.
Well, what can happen is what happened in Loudoun County, Virginia. And you've got to see the secret list. God bless that Billy Goldfeder. And I don't even like the guy, but no, I love Billy. I love Billy Goldfeder, man. I love the guy. So, and he does so much for us, all of us, collectively in the fire service. And he makes me look like a slacker when it comes to having his head and his heart in the job. Loudoun County, Virginia, underground LP tank, more or less a routine hazmat call. I think they sent a hazmat company for meters, I'm going to suppose, and closest engine company. and they get on the scene, and there is a catastrophic explosion, and these a number of guys are trapped in the basement, and the radio traffic will grip you. It will bring tears to your eyes. It will absolutely. It'll grab you right by the throat and get your attention. It is your sound. You're hearing firefighters that are they don't know. Some of them, maybe there was one that didn't make it, and but just horrible Mayday transmissions, and it was difficult. The other thing is, and actually Dan Shaw brought this up. Our buddy Dan, who's on a conference call right now, couldn't make it. Has to do with fire is going to keep burning, bro. You just can't shut everything down and switch over to the search and rescue mode for your brother or sister firefighter. That fire is going to continue to burn. And in this case, the incident commander is saying, get that deck done in operation and knock down some of that fire, or these guys are going to burn. Highly, highly recommend two things now. One is the IAFC, UL, and Department of Energy storage systems. The other is the report in the radio transmissions from Loudoun County, and that is on the secret list. Highly recommend that you take the time. It's worth the time, and look into both of those incidents.
And Bill, before we move on, just want to thank our friends at Keyhose again. We appreciate their time and their effort in helping us here. The other thing with these things that we call ambushes a lot of times, and our chief expected the company officer. When I used to go out on BI, I used to say it's a walk in the building inspection in New York City is BI. It's a walk in a neighborhood ruined by paperwork, and I'll do the paperwork. It really is. You go out there and you find these things that are out there. You find these things that, and we could go through so many in my time on the FDNY, Joe's time on the FDNY, the Atlantic Avenue fire, the Howie Carplunk and Michael Riley fire in the bodega in the dollar store that was renovated illegally. And just all of this stuff that you go through and you find these in your career. And there, but for the grace of God, go each and every one of us. But it is so important that if you see something, you say something when you are out there in your neighborhood. And yeah, sometimes it's going to be a pain in the ass. You're going to have to get everybody involved and get everything else. I go to one that my company went to. I wasn't on duty, but they went to a water leak and somebody had stole the water meter. And it turned out to be a company that did metal finishing. They etched metal for all these things, and they etched glass.
Mm-hmm.
And the lieutenant walked in and he said cyanide. And then he saw another thing that said acid, dip tank. And he said, okay, time out. Let's back out of here. And he called for hazmat and those people to come through. And they came in here. They ended up with a security guard on this vacant warehouse for 7 months. The cleanup costs were in the millions of dollars. They went after the owner of the company that moved. They went after him for $7 million in fees and security. But we had everybody there. You see these buildings, you don't know what's in there. You're the fire department. Knock on the door. Hey, what are you guys doing in here? We're just in the neighborhood looking around. What's going on here? I mean, some of the stuff that you have in some of these buildings, you have no idea what's in there. In that one Mike was talking about, Chief Nestor was talking about with the batteries going in those buildings, did anybody draw up plans for this? Was an architect involved? Do the floors, are they going to support that weight? What's going to happen in these places? And this is huge stuff. And like you said, Bill, if they pull a permit, we're okay. If they don't pull a permit, that's where we're going to have problems.
You're okay as long as that communication works back to the FD. In our situation, we had a lot of inspectors that the information that they were gathering never translated back to the fire department. And now you come up on it, it's a surprise. The other thing that we used to deal with a lot is vacants. we used to walk through vacants all the time, and especially when I was a company officer. Well, why are we walking through here? You walk through a vacant, and all of a sudden you find drums and illegal chemicals being stored, and the time that this place is on fire is not the time to discover it. And that's why we used to routinely walk through even vacants. The occupied ones were actually easy. You can get in there, and most people were very genuine and letting you in to look around. But the vacants, you never knew what was going on. So we used to walk through vacant factories, and even with I worked in a neighborhood with a lot of 3-story frames. We found an old meth lab, and we found two 55-gallon drums of ether from the meth lab. It's amazing, but you have to be out there to do it, and sometimes the guys balk at it, but it's the company officer's job to say, listen, this may save your life. You don't want to trip over this stuff when the place is on fire.
When I was a fireman in Spanish Harlem, we were out on a run, and we were up on First Avenue, 105th to 106th Street, and a lieutenant looked over and saw a Chinese food restaurant, and above it was a 5-story vacant. But on the second floor, in one of these boarded up windows, was an air conditioner sticking out of the window. And he's like, okay, red flag, let's go. We're going to go investigate this building. And it wasn't even our administrative building. We went in there, and these people who owned the Chinese restaurant were immigrants, and they were trying to live the American dream. And they couldn't afford the rent for the restaurant, plus the rent for someplace to live. So what they did was, in the back of the Chinese restaurant, they put a circular staircase up. And in the vacant building upstairs, they built an apartment inside, all boxed in this vacant that you had no idea was there. The only thing that gave us an indication was that air conditioning unit. And if we had gotten a fire there at 3 o'clock in the morning, the people upstairs sleeping would have been dead, gone, And it's just, these are the things that can come and haunt you, that can bite you.
We had an incident one time in a place that actually did custom cars, and at night, we didn't even know it. At night, the guy the place ran 24/7, and during the night shift, they would actually close the place up, pull down the steel gates, cross the windows all barred. We had a fire one night, and the first engine company pulls out, and a car drives right through the garage door out into the street because the people were locked in, and the only way they can escape, they got in a car, started it up, and drove it out of the burning building right through the garage door and almost hit the first dual engine company. When we pulled up as the first dual ladder, we found one of the occupants in a steel cage that was over top of one of the windows, balled up in a steel cage that normally would go over an air conditioner. And we had to rip the steel cage to get him out. But that first dual engine company, that poor captain, he was shocked. He says, I almost got hit by a car coming out of the burning building. We never knew that they locked the people in there at night. They went home at night, and they locked the employees inside the building, pulled all the steel roll down gates, everything down.
We went in a paint and body shop, and back when we were young and stupid, we used to cut little triangles. Not a big triangle, a little triangle, because we're in a big hurry to get in there, man. It's a paint and body shop at 4 o'clock in the morning. So, like, when something blows up in there, we're all going to take our turns, like at the bakery or deli, and take a number and be gentlemen about waiting our turn to get out of there when our ass is on fire. So we go in there, and what a fine how do you do. It was the abuelo, which is the grandfather, had just come from Cuba and was had a bunk for security purposes in the body shop and at night. And he, first of all, he didn't understand we weren't expecting it. We came about this close to being shot. He had a shotgun in his hand, and he was going to use it. And we were very, very lucky. Guys, Mike, you said it, Mike Dugan, living the American dream. I don't care what goes on with immigration and politics. Like I say, we don't have control over that. Trouble is, we don't have control over things that we should have control over, is knowing what the occupancy of these buildings is and where we're going to find people. We're going to find them everywhere. Where are all these people going to live? And Now, I wanted to give a shout out to our brother Clark Lamping. Clark is in Los Angeles right now, and Clark County Fire Department is Metro Las Vegas. They sent a strike team of 3 engines to, and they were operating in the Pacific Palisades area, I believe. And I'm just wondering out loud how many firefighters have lost their homes. You know, it seems like they get what grabs the news is the celebrities. Okay, they're on Pacific Coast High. Hey, what about the blue collar families? And where are all these people going to live? Who's going to rebuild these houses? And then, I mean, I got a taste of that in Hurricane Andrew. 16,000 homes destroyed. Mine was one of them. But we could go a few miles and go to some place where you could go to a grocery store. You could find a place to live, at least. These poor folks, they're in a huge pickle, and it's perfect. I talked to Clark Saturday. It is the perfect storm. And these homes are just absolutely incinerated. And Chief Mike Nasta, you mentioned something about, or alluded to, a lack of communication between fire prevention and in operations. And if we in operations are not reaching out to fire prevention and let them know how much we value their time and attention, and most of the impairments and the violations that they discover are things that could kill us. They're looking out for us. And there is a disconnect.
A dangerous disconnect.
A dangerous disconnect. And I think the 3 men that are doing a fine job of connecting that disconnect, and you know, I don't want to slight anybody, is Glenn Corbett, Jerry Tracy, and Jack Murphy. Because they understand we in operations can't do it alone. When I speak to sprinkler fitters, I greet them with, "Good morning, firefighters." And they look at me funny. I said, "Hey, if it's a big box building or a high-rise building, you're a hell of a lot better firefighter than we are."
Yep.
And that's a fact.
They're placing firefighters every 16 feet, or whatever the code is.
My friend, IKEA furniture. By the way, Captain Mike, if I ever agree to buy Renee, my daughter, any more furniture at IKEA and then try to put it together, there's always a bunch of parts that they've got. ESFR systems, early suppression, fast response. There's no sprinklers in the racks, and they use slats rather than solid racks. And Chief Mike, you got a firefighter with an 1 3/4 line every 10 feet.
Yep.
For a total of a design, hydraulically designed up to 10 feet. Now, why would it exceed that? Incendiary or a different occupancy,
It changes.
aerosol can, a flammable liquid spill. But fire engineering, I think, does a really good job of documenting these cases. I am always fascinated when a supposedly well-protected, well-inspected building that is sprinklered is destroyed by fire.
Bill, we're putting something together now for fire engineering on that. And the amazing thing is, and you talk about being ambushed, is we have different homes, different buildings, different places where sometimes the chief, they're putting a fulfillment center. It's $1.2 million on the footprint. And then it also has 5 different levels on a tilt-up type structure. And a lot of them are robotic. And the problem is a lot of these places are in rural areas because they're close to the highway and the building codes are not that good. And they are putting these things up. And one I was just looking at has a volunteer fire department that has the total of 26 members, and they're protecting. It's 5 interior floors, and it's over 1,000,001 in square footage. And this is their protection. Well, if you don't get involved in this immediately when they plan this, if you don't get a seat at the table, this is going to bite you. If you hide your head in the sand, you are going to doom your department and doom your members. You have to get involved.
Yes.
There's no truer words than what you just spoke of, Mike. But there are some times that I'll give you an example. I was involved in the design of a townhouse complex, and even though I'm retired, I still belong to the volunteer fire department where I live. And they built this townhouse complex, and so listen, you have to have access to the rear of these buildings for ladders. I says you're putting up homes here that are beyond the capability of an engine's ground ladder. I says the only way to access the rear of these buildings, where most of the bedrooms happen to be located, is via aerial. And well, they didn't want to give up the property, so they built this townhouse complex. You don't want to be hanging out that back window at 3 o'clock in the morning because we just can't reach you, because they did not put any access for ladder companies to the rear. They didn't want to lose the property. The money always rules, and the people's safety winds up paying for it.
Hey, Mike, I wrote an article about 3 to 5 story wood frame townhouses, condominiums today. And I did a lot of research. I did a lot of research with these buildings. The common thread is all open 2x4 truss floor systems. Why?
Sure.
Because I could run all the HVAC and run all the plumbing.
Mhm.
There's not a problem. You have a common cockloft on every floor.
Yep.
Furthermore, the property, just what you described, there's no access for portable, even to bring portable ladders. I took a picture of this compound. It's Curious Joe on Route 17. Somebody had to pay a lot of money to put this complex up, because if you have a fire in this complex, you're going to lose a lot of people. And if you want, I'll send you a copy of my article. I worked on this probably for about 6 months to a year, just gathering, but I've been doing it much more longer to get my information together. What I came up with also, we have a tool called a cockloft nozzle. How are we going to put this out? You have a fire that gets into this confined space. The cockloft nozzle is probably one tool in the toolbox. The unfortunate part is getting in between these trusses. It's going to be very cumbersome. So the bottom line is, these buildings are built all over the place, all over the United States. I have some pictures from Georgia where this woman's coming out the window upside down as the fire is blowing over her head. So there's been fires all around the country with this type of building, and it's a cheap, affordable housing that's being put up today. Truss roofs, truss floors, OSB exterior, vinyl siding. Some are sprinkled, some are not sprinkled. But it's a new trend of housing today, and just what you described, it's a nightmare. If you look at what happened in Edgewater about 8 years ago, maybe 5 to 8 years, somewhere around that.
About 8 years ago, Joe.
Yeah, it's unbelievable the amount of energy that came out of these buildings from the fire. You couldn't even get near it.
That was the second time that complex burnt down.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
They didn't learn from the first time.
Right.
Yeah.
And the other thing is the R13, and this goes back to everything. The Amazon warehouse that burnt down in California was on a yard hydrant system. Well, they had the early response sprinkler systems. Okay. They had the sprinkler systems in there, but they were on a yard system. When an engine came up and hooked up onto the hydrant, they took all the water away from it. You have to know, again, you can't hide your head in the sand. You have to know how that works. But you have to bring your own water in. Is this a yard system? If you hook up on that yard sprinkler, on that yard hydrant, you're taking away from the firefighters that you have in there, the sprinklers.
Yep.
You have to know all of the things about the complex. Is it a dead end main, or is it backfed another way? How does this work? All of these things are part of your planning for this. Because if you fail to plan, you plan to fail.
And you get ambushed.
Yeah.
And you get ambushed.
Well,
I was
that's
gonna
right,
ask you
right
now.
out to what we spoke earlier. You got to get out there and you have to look. And we have a bunch of complexes like that with those yard hydrants, and every one of our engine companies knew that you don't touch those hydrants. You got to bring water in from the outside. And even sometimes bringing water in from the outside, you were still robbing that system because it's still the same mains that were supplying it.
When I was a lieutenant, I was working down in Brooklyn in engine 207 for a while. I was UFO until further orders in 207. And we went to the Brooklyn Navy Yard and we hooked up to a hydrant. We had a small little job. And the next pumper came in behind us and hooked up to the hydrant. We lost all water because it was a dead end main on a yard system in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And none of us, I mean, I was just a brand new lieutenant, scared shit of my own shadow. And I was like, holy crap. And now to come to find out, anything comes behind you and hooks up, they take your water. So you have to be aware of these things going into this all the time.
Those yards, like when we go down to Port Newark, all the property in Port Newark, and I don't know how this functions. Maybe you do, Mike, or Joe. The Port Authority actually leases all the land in Port Newark from the city of Newark. We go down there sometimes and we do hydrant inspections twice a year, spring and fall. Every single hydrant in the city gets opened, flushed. Every engine company has a district. You go down that port, and when we do it in March, that hydrant may be on the street. You come back again in October, November when we do it, and it'll be fenced in the middle of some trucking company's yard. They move these things around, and you can't even find them. There are some days that you'll go, 6 months later, what was a street now becomes somebody's yard. They're constantly moving the properties around. And you go down there, fire, and all of a sudden now the hydrant that 3 months ago you thought were good, now all of a sudden you can't even find it.
Are they doing that by arranging shipping containers and making?
No, Bill, they actually chain link fences. A lot of these shipping containers, when they come off and they store them, they'll chain link out a portion of land to store these containers, and they'll be in the middle of the yard sometimes. And I used to go down on Sundays when I was working as a deputy. Airport and the port, I used to go down on Sundays because it was always the least busy days and you can get around. You drive through the middle of these stacks of containers, all of a sudden you find a fire hydrant. That last inspection was in the street. And it happens constantly. You want to talk about being blindsided. That engine company is coming in here thinking the hydrant's in a location, and now you can't even access that location. So it's a moving target. And nobody seemed to have control over these. And the Port Authority just, they sublease that land out to, trucking companies or shipping companies or whoever. We have huge piles of rock salt and cobblestones that they offload ships down there. Most of the rock salt in the New York, New Jersey area comes into Port Newark. Now, all of a sudden, you'll have 3 huge piles of rock salt, and behind it, close to the water, will be a hydrant that you can't even see it no more or get to it.
What are they doing with the cobblestones?
The cobblestones, believe it or not, they sell. I tell you a great story. You go to Home Depot, those things are like $10 a piece. I go down there and buy them for $1.25 down the pier. So when I did my driveway, I just went down the pier and loaded the pickup truck up. The guy sold me $1.25 because they're wholesaling them out to all these other, home improvement stores. But it's mostly landscaping and curbing and stuff like that. You'd be amazed at these huge piles of cobblestones that are down there.
Years ago, back in the days of the cobblestone streets in New York, they were used as ballast when the ships came.
Yes,
They wound up on the streets of New York.
Yep.
I want to read a statement by Frank Brannigan. It's really hits home. He says, if the building is our enemy, then time is its secret weapon. Now, you go to a fire, you don't know how long this fire has been burning prior to arrival. And what I found interesting, just to share, when Fireman Klein was killed in Ladder 170 in Canarsie 2 years ago, I looked at this fire and I said, geez, what happened? What went wrong here? Well, what happens at a fire, you pull up, we're talking about dead-end mains. That street was a dead-end main, no pressure coming out. When I lived in Brooklyn, I lived on a dead-end street. I know for a fact, you open up the hydrant, no water comes out. So now you have a dead-end main. Secondly, the fire was burning for a significant period of time. And third, there was an issue with the pumper getting water. So you have a delay. So I look at it this way. You have a revolver and you put a bullet in it. So now you got 2 bullets in the revolver. And things start going wrong simultaneously. You get 3, 4, 5 bullets in that revolver. Well, eventually the bullet's going to come out. So there's something at a fire where things start going wrong at such a fast rate. To make command decisions, it takes instantaneous decision making, and sometimes you can't. You don't know what the unknown factor is. But getting back to this fire with Klein, they were in the exposure of a 3-story on one side, 2-story private dwelling. Fire started on the right side of the building. When they pulled up, you couldn't even see the block. Why? It was a windy day. There's a bullet in the gun. Windy day. Dead end main. Okay. So now they're starting to get water on the fire. They had a problem with the first 2 pumps, but they're getting water on the fire. They're operating in exposure. What happened was the fire went from the kitchen into the roof area, cockle, if you want to call it, pitch roof area. There was a bearing wall that was a firewall between the 2 buildings. It went above that, got into that exposure. So now, when they built these homes, they made a shaft for all the plumbing and the HVAC system on both sides of the building by the kitchen. So now the fire is in the exposures, cockle area. The gravity-fed crap that was being stored in there down that shaft, and now the shaft's going merrily on the exposure. Meanwhile, it was well vented in the back, the exposure, no problem, there's no fire there. Now, all of a sudden, somebody discovers clothes burning at the base of the washer dryer, which was by the shaft. They thought it was just rubbish, wasn't much to think about. When that thing, sheetrock failed, the back door where the wind was coming, took that fire, blew it up the stairs like a blowtorch. The one fireman dove out the window, broke his elbow. The captain and a guy from rescue were in the bathroom. Fireman Klein got caught in the flow path. A phenomenal that anybody couldn't have second guessed this, because it fooled me. It fooled anybody. I couldn't figure out what happened at this fire. They already knocked down the fire in that one room in the exposure, and they were in the hallway taking a blow. It's a very narrow hallway. So as soon as that shaft sheetrock failed, the wind came from the back sliding glass door. It drove this fire upstairs like a blowtorch. And all of a sudden, it's blowing out the window. They just extinguished the fire. And unfortunately, the fireman lost his life. So the point I'm trying to make here is, at a fire, when things start going wrong, you got to recalculate. And I don't think anybody could have done anything different at this fire. And what I do mention in my article, you weren't there. Don't second guess yourself. This is what you could have, should have, would have. That's BS.
Yep.
Because we did the best we could on the cards that we were playing at that particular time.
You know, Joe, you hit it right on the head. My grandmother can make great decisions if he has good information. When you don't have it, you can't keep up with that fire. And one of the things, shafts are always problematic. One of the reports I always wanted from my roof team when I was instant commanders was, let me know where the shafts are, because shafts are going to spread fire, and it spreads them fast. Because shafts, you go back again, you want to learn history. What were the shafts from? In those older buildings, the shaft, the transits over the apartment doors and the windows created what? That was their air conditioning. There was no air conditioning. So they're doing their job, and they do it well. And we have to keep up with those things. And what they do over the years, especially in 5-story buildings, and you guys in New York have a lot more than we do, is they covered those shafts up. You look at even dumbwaiter shafts and air shafts. All of those things, if you look at the building nowadays, you can't even find them. The roof team, most of the times, can see them. And that's why I always look reports from that roof team. Let me know where the shafts are.
Yeah. You know, if you want, Bill, if you want to send a copy of that article to Mike and the rest of you got their email,
I'd like that.
Yeah, I will share it. I will share it. The Canarsie, that was Avenue E or something like that.
Avenue N, and I forgot the street. But I was a welder in Brownsville when I was 16 till I was about 19, and I worked there. I know the buildings in Canarsie, and then they were built on. They were overnight. All these buildings came up, you know, and at that time there was no fire prevention looking at what was going on, or had any knowledge of this particular layout of this building. I couldn't figure out what happened here. It really confused me. But Dan Malinowski did the reenactment, and he told me something interesting. He said I never seen anybody go to expense like New York City. They built him a platform around the whole building. They didn't want to disturb any of the collapsed area, so he can go in and operate piece by piece to see what occurred. He said he never seen a fire department do something like that. And I said, well, somebody gets killed in a fire, we spare no expense to find out what happened.
That's
And
awesome.
I commend him. I mean, the man is brilliant. You
Brilliant.
know,
Yep. Hey, we're just about at the end here. Jimmy had a fighting 43 had a run, so he had to wave bye. And you guys that are on duty, even if you're not on a busy company, it's just that's the way it is. You can not have a run all day, and as soon as you go out to drill and you drop that first coupling in the street, man, they're going to be calling you for something, and it's usually not a fire; it's a medical call. But I want to thank my buddies at Key Hose and Mark Lighthill and Dave Hibben. Mark, this is why it's such an easy endorsement for me to talk glowingly about Key Hose, is that their people came from the fire service. They were highly respected. Chief Lighthill was a chief officer in Brevard County, around where the Space Coast is. And Dave Hibben, DC Engine 10. If you're watching, Dave, all right, brother, you know, I got to brag on you every time I see you. And, Dave, if you're listening, 8,500 runs a year, that ain't normal, man. And anybody that has an appetite for that for years and years and years, the way I did, is not, I didn't have 85, I had about 5,000 runs, but it takes a special type of person to put up with that kind of crap. You got anything for us, Mike Dugan?
Just want to say thank you to all of our people out there listening, whether it's in archive or on the show. Thank you. And listen, get involved. Go out and spend time at these buildings. Find out what's in your district, because you do not want to get bit in the butt by these things. And very honestly, for the people in the smaller career departments, volunteer departments, you might not be saving your life, but you might be saving your son or your daughter's life, who's going to be on the engine in 15 or 20 years when you're no longer here.
Yeah, in a different century, right? In a different century.
Yep.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, a different decade, Bill.
Decade. There we go. I'm from a different century. All right, guys. Thank you so much, Chief Nasta.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity.
God bless you guys. Thanks for participating. Brothers and sisters, till next month, may God keep you safe in our most noble of professions.